Okay, the Yolo County Land Acknowledgement Statement. We should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered for this meeting. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people, including the Yocha Dehe Winton Nation today. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be gathered here today on their traditional lands.
All right. Thank you, Joan. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good holiday season, and the last couple of weeks you've managed to stay warm and dry. Looks like we're not out of it yet, so batten down the hatches, but hopefully we get some dry weather in a week or so. So today, Doug MacKenzie, as you can see, who's a longtime Yolo County Master Gardener, is going to talk about grapes, which are, a wonderful addition to your garden, both as far as little food production and environmentally. And if you're into making wine, well, all the better. I was wanted to say, in the beginning here that, I think we have a number of presentations already scheduled. So I hope you'll be able to join us often through this next year. I think we have some very good, varied presentations. And I'm trying to get a calendar or a list to Joan and Jennifer so they can maybe send it out next time and you can see what's coming up and those dates that you definitely don't want to miss. And just next session, which is going to be the 26th, Jennifer Gilbert, who's the sustainability coordinator for the city of Davis, is going to do a presentation on composting. A number of different approaches and including vermicomposting. So it's a great way to make probably the best of all soil amendments. So if you can, don't miss that. So with that, Doug, it's all yours.
Okay. As Mike said, I've been a master gardener for a while, though only since 2017. It hasn't been a real long time. But I have been dealing with grapes and making wine for a lot longer than that. So grapes are one of the natural things I would latch onto for my master gardener work. So anyway, as far as growing grapes, I have mostly just done wine grapes. I have a little, well, not so little, 1 acre vineyard out near Winters, and that's one heck of a lot of work for one person. Sometimes my discussion will be seem to be more oriented toward growing wine grapes, but I'm trying to develop the presentation so I give good enough attention to folks who just maybe want a couple vines in their backyard so they can have fruit they eat, perhaps as a decorative feature as well. So, okay, is this one? Yes, it is. Okay, when you're looking to grow grapes, you're going to be more successful if you actually get a bit of planning done before you start putting them in the ground, because they do take a bit of work to have a good structure to them so that they'll survive and produce a good crop. I'll be starting with how to actually establish new vines after I discuss planting activities and a bit about the actual physiology of the vine, which helps explain why you prune them the way you do. And then, of course, with any plants, you want to know what you need to know about ongoing nutrition and managing pests. And with grapes, they have their own way of pruning and different methods that I'll discuss. And also canopy management, which isn't thought about much, but is actually one of the more important things you could be doing during the growing season for the health of the vines. So to begin your planning, you need to get with yourself and decide, okay, why do I want to plant grapes? Maybe you want to make wine. Maybe you just want to eat some tasty fruit, or you can have them as a significant landscape feature in your yard. Here, you can see some of the more exotic ways you can go. If you were to web search grapevine structures, you can get all sorts of good ideas for this kind of thing if you want. And then there's less elaborate things. The one in the lower right is using a grapevine as more as sort of a garden wall or partition. And other ones are actually out in vineyards, showing how vines can be constructed as more or less like little trees as opposed to a trained to a more elaborate structure. Another factor you really have to consider is if you want to make wine, you do need a pretty good bit of space. This row here, it's I believe 26 vines, and that'll give you maybe 10, 12 gallons of wine. So again, there's the space issue you need to consider. And then you need to understand everything that the vines need. Besides space, they also need a lot of sunlight all day if you can get it, or at least 6 hours. And then you need a good support structure. If the support structure isn't there, you just sort of get this wild mess that lies all over the ground and gets buggy and everything. The vines need do need water, but also good drainage. They don't like to have their feet wet too long. As with every plant, you need to know a bit about the nutrients. For fertilizers, you really don't need to go too heavy on it with the vines. We have pretty good soils here in Yolo County, so you're pretty much in maintenance mode to replace what the vines have taken out. And then the leaf canopy is can be very thick if you're not pruning well, and you need good air circulation. It improves quality of the fruit, but it also does a lot for controlling pests and other diseases. And then, of course, with everything, you've got little maintenance issues. There's your irrigation system, your trellising system. You just sort of keep all that up. A little bit about sort of the timing of what the grapevines are doing throughout the year. If you're growing grapes for wine, and you have a lot of trellis out there, and a lot of vines tend to, this annual cycle is kind of important because each task involves a certain amount of work. And if you're planning a month-long trip to Europe, you may need to take account of your scheduling to cover some of these. So as you see, winter pruning is best done just at the end of winter, basically. That's why I'm doing this presentation today, because now's the time people start thinking about pruning. And if you're looking at grapevines, I'll tell you not yet. And I'll explain a little more on that later. Bud break, when all the new shoots start poking out. This information is all from my experience in my vineyard. Tends to be toward the end of March and beginning of April. The actual flower bloom mid to late May. And you don't really, ultimately you need a tool or a shovel to monitor how damp the soil is, but I've found that I haven't really needed to start irrigation until early summer. And then veraison, that is the point where grape berries, they started out as sort of hard, chalky green colored BBs. But at some point, the color starts to change a little bit. That the opaqueness. You start seeing a little bit more translucence. The color starts changing, particularly in red grapes. You can start seeing a little bit of red color coming on. Then if you pop one in your mouth, you can start tasting sugar along about this point. Again, it tends to start at the time frame I show there. One thing, once you start seeing veraison, that's the time you need to start thinking about bird netting if you're going to need it. Because as soon as the sugar gets up to a certain point, all your birds and small mammals that can crawl up into your vines are going to start feasting on it. So you'll need to protect for that. And then finally harvest August, September timeframe. I have seen as early as last week in July, and maybe as late as first week in August, or excuse me, October here in Yolo County. But primarily those 2 months are when I'm seeing harvest. As far as deciding what grapes you want to grow and purchasing the vines, with table grapes, which I don't have a whole lot of experience with, though I've done a lot of looking around, there are a lot of varieties that exist, but you're not going to have an easy time finding them in the big box type nurseries. You know, you can find Thompson's seedless, flame seedless, maybe a couple other varieties, and that's it. There's a lot more interesting grapes out there that you'll need to check the internet to locate them. And I've identified 4 websites where for table grapes, you can actually find some good information about what they have and where you might find them beyond those nurseries. For wine grapes, there are wine grape nurseries, and many of them are just catering to the wine industry, and they're not necessarily interested in selling, you know, a couple dozen vines to the home grower. Though there is one grower based in Sonoma County that I've been getting my grapes from, that actually do cater somewhat to home growers. And so now you've somehow figured out how you're going to get your grapes, where you're going to get them. I would recommend, before you even buy them, to at least have some of the infrastructure in place, so when you get them home, you're ready to plant. Support structure is important. You know, the vines don't necessarily look like much, but when they're loaded grapes, they're very heavy, and you need to have a solid structure. With commercial vineyards, where there's a lot of vines, you typically see, you know, the post and wire trellis. It's on a small scale, it's perhaps a bit of a chore to maintain, and there are other ways you can go about it to get a sturdy structure. And one thing about locating your structure is you don't want to put it up against a wall. You want to be able to access the vines from both sides when you're working with them. And also, I mentioned that the vines need air circulation, and up against the wall, they're not going to get much of that. So anyway, as I mentioned, just web search grapevine structure if you want to find some interesting ideas on how to do that. There's a photo of a post and wire trellis, and there are a lot of how-to videos on the web that you can look about how to build those. But an important feature is the end posts have to be very sturdy. That guy wire that goes from the top of the end post down to the ground has to be in place, because with the heavy vines, when you get them tied to the wire that's going between posts, as they get heavy, they start pulling down on the wire, and then those end posts just start going in on each other. Then the thing begins to collapse. And so you have to maintain that. Every couple of years, you need to retighten the wires. And, so again, it's only if you need that for longer rows. But I would recommend perhaps some other things. I took this picture at City Hall, which in here in Woodland. It's a couple blocks from my house. So there's a pergola in back that is always a cool idea for a home grapevines. But this front, something of that sort, it doesn't necessarily need to be so elaborate, but what you have is you have posts, and then you have a solid post along the top that if you're dealing with heavy vines, that solid post is going to keep everything vertical and will support the load. And then that mesh in the middle, something of that sort, is something you can tie your shoots to, so everything doesn't just fly all over the place and fall, go to the ground. So it sort of keeps everything up. I would probably want to go with perhaps a bigger mesh on that fence fabric so you can put your hands through it. But you can go with steel posts, like say they use for a chain link fence, and then with that crossbar on top. That's another sturdy mechanism that'll keep everything vertical and off the ground. Okay. It's not moving. Okay, now it's moving. And again, here's another picture of a trellis over a pathway. This one's a lot more rustic, but effective. And you'd keep in mind, if you want some of this sort, developing the vine to that structure is going to take you a bit longer. So as far as physiology, I'm not going to get real scientific here. I'm going to just sort of point out a few things that help you understand how the vines actually grow and why you prune them the way you do. This is your typical shoot that comes out each year from a vine. And grapes are produced on the shoots that come out this year. And they don't, if you leave that shoot in place, that shoot itself isn't going to produce any more grapes. So that's why when pruning time comes, you're basically cutting at least 90% of this last year's shoots. You're cutting away about 90% of that. So you'll see on that features of it is it has nodes every 3-4 inches or whatever it is, and at each node there's a leaf, and it shows a great time clusters that can later down on the vine. But
Can you go back a
basically
little
2
bit?
clusters is adequate.
Your voice got lost.
Pardon?
Doug, you
Oh.
froze there for 30 seconds or something, 20 seconds.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Our internet's been a little squirrely. Okay, so at each of the nodes, you're going to have a leaf, and you'll see 2, 3, and maybe some smaller clusters beyond that. But ultimately, if you're seeing more than 2 clusters, you probably just want to knock them off anyway, and stick with 2. And beyond that, at some of the nodes, you might see some little lateral shoots coming out beside the leaf. And also there's another bud at that node. That bud is going to be next year's crop. So, and then tendrils, of course, help the vine cling to things. such. So basically that's the structure, and those little nodes that are, or excuse me, buds that are left each node are important, and because that's where next year's canes are going to be coming out.
Can you just point with your mouse, just those points that you.
Does my mouth work? Okay. Yeah. Nodes here, 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 here. There's a bud at each location.
So where would you cut this vine at again?
Okay. I'm going to be getting to pruning a little further down, and I'll get to that. Depend on the type of pruning. If you're spur pruning, you basically keep a bud here, keep a bud here, and cut it right there. And cane pruning is a different thing where you have to leave behind the whole cane, but then you're cutting off other canes, and it's a little more complicated, and I'll explain it better a little later.
If you put
Here's a
questions
close-up.
in chat, I was just gonna say, if you put questions in chat, maybe Doug will pause from time to time, and Joan or he can read those questions and answer them that way. That's usually the way that works best. So put questions in chat.
Yeah, actually, Joan, if we see questions stacking up to like 3 or 4, maybe let me know to stop, and we can move on and deal with them. So here's an internal look at the bud, and it shows you that everything that you need for next year is already in place. You have secondary buds in case the primary bud, has a problem. This flower cluster primordia, as soon as that bud opens in spring bud break, you'll actually see little flower cluster coming out at the same time you see the leaves coming out. And then there's tendrils all ready to go just right inside that bud. So here you see on the left a vine about 6 inches extended after bud break, and you can see right in the middle of the picture you have a little flower cluster right there among the leaves. And this is a time where you want, if later I'll talk about sulfur spray that you might want to do. This is a good time to apply your first sulfur spray when the shoots are still short and the flowers haven't emerged yet. On the right, you see flower clusters. They aren't particularly pretty, no color or anything, but they do attract pollinators, bees in particular. I see a lot of them out there at this time when you see all the stamens and pistils exposed. And that's a time you don't necessarily want to be spraying, because you want to let the pollinators do their thing and not be disturbed. Okay, as far as vine structure, the forms of training, what I've shown here is the 3 primary structures you'll see in grapevine vineyards. Again, you're just planting a lot of vines in a space, and so the vines aren't going to be on a large structures. On the top, you'll see a lot of that mostly. Most wine grapes can be spur pruned, and it's easier than cane pruning, so you'll see a lot of that. Where your permanent wood of your structure is that T. You see the vertical trunk, and then what they call the cordon trained to the wire, then all the little spurs sticking sticking out of it. In the middle picture, it's cane pruned, where the permanent structure is just the main stump, and at the top you might see just some smaller stubs, but mostly you just see a cane sticking out there. This is a cane for the coming crop. And I'll explain why you would need to do that a little bit later. And then particularly in Lodi and some places in the Sierra foothills, you'll see a lot of head training. It's also spur pruned, but it's trained more like a little tree. As far as support structure, it's kind of nice in that all you really need is a good solid post to tie it to and keep it vertical, and that's it. There's no extra wire or other stuff. And again, you're pruning it more like a tree, a freestanding tree. To establish the new vineyard, it says establishing the new wine. Oh, new vine, excuse me. Oh. Anyway, in the literature, when they're talking about establishing new vines, they're typically talking again about your vine row type situation where you're planting a lot of vines and you're looking to get grapes sooner than later. That's when you see the literature and how on the process in doing that, they typically talk about a 3-year process. And I've found that you should probably expect it's going to take you 4. When you're getting ready to set up your vineyard, you really want to have your support structure in place before you dig a hole to plant your vine. You at least need the support stake. And as you're developing the vine, you don't allow it to produce grapes in the first 3 to 4 years. You want all the growth potential to go into building the vine as opposed to producing crop. So in going through this process, I'll refer to season 1, season 2, season 3 in just sort of a general sense. We don't want to get too tied up in it being a problem if season 1 didn't complete it as well as it should have. So in season 1, you're putting the vine in the ground, and the main thing you want to do is just get it set in the ground, get a good root system, and hopefully establish a good strong cane that you can tie to the post, and that'll become the trunk of your vine. Sometimes you don't really have that strong a cane, in which case the best thing to do is cut it all the way back down and just leave 2 buds on what you cut it down to. And then what comes out of those 2 buds next year will come out good and strong. When the buds on the vine emerge in spring, pretty much every bud wants to produce a new shoot. And if you have a very young vine trying to send out new shoots from too many buds, it's just going to continue to be weak. So you want to give it a good start from fewer buds where all the energy just is more focused. Okay, going into season 2, what you see here is a good start for year 1. You have a vine actually comes up, and it looks like it's at least pencil thin all the way up to the wire that I want to train to. And that's what you'd like to see at the end of season 1. In which case, what you're going to do is cut it at that bud that's just below the fruiting wire. And so as season 2 comes and bud break happens, those top 2 buds will each send out a shoot, which are the ones you want to train out to the wire during the season. And then if everything works well in season 2, at season 3, you'll actually be able to start from a point where you have shoots along the cordon, and then the new shoots will come out of the buds and start looking like a real vine. I don't really often have that quick success, so I'm usually going into season 4 before I get something that looks like that. On a note, if you're doing the freestanding vines that look more like a tree, you don't have something that looks like that. You have something more that looks like a little tree. When you're doing that sort of vine, you're going to be doing it with vines that can be spur pruned. So you just have a lot of spurs sticking out. And that's what you would really like to see by the time you're done with season 3, something that's going to be ready to go next year. Okay, I have some notes here that I haven't kept up with. So as far as nutrition, you can really get into the weeds, and there's a lot of literature out there. You can look in books and see pictures of leaves showing examples of potential deficiencies of various minerals. And you can collect soil samples, you can collect tissue samples, and otherwise you're going with visual observations, but no one of those items is fully definitive. And then you can be misled when you think you have a deficiency and you think you need to add some fertilizer or something, and it may just have to do with your watering, as it seems like everything, first question you always ask, oh, what's your watering process? As far as my experience, what I've generally seen around is that the things where in this area that you're most likely to have an issue with are nitrogen, potassium, and zinc. And if you check into the IPM website and follow that pathway you see on the slide there, when you get to cultural tips, you actually see a little table that lists nitrogen, potassium, and zinc, and what kind of dosages you might want to use. So you can get that detail. Nitrogen is perhaps the easiest to identify. Your leaves are just kind of yellow. And general stunted growth, and as it says, poor berry set. But you can't have too much nitrogen, and what you see then is your leaves are going to be kind of a dark green, and the distance between the length of the inner nodes becomes longer, and just a lot of extra vigor in the vine. And all that sort of diverts the resources of the vine from ripening the fruit. Nitrogen's a mobile nutrient, and so you never want to put too much on, because you're just going to run it on down past the roots. So take it easy on the nitrogen, though you will ultimately need it at some point. Potassium, there's a pretty good picture, and at the end of a growing season, even if you are okay with potassium, you still may see some of that, because after you produce a lot of grapes, the vines kind of used a lot of potassium real fast. The leaves are still trying to catch up. So you don't necessarily need to get really worried about seeing that kind of thing, when you're getting toward the end of the growing season. And generally, if you were to collect a soil sample, you might find that the amount of potassium that shows up is not all that bad. But the issue may be that it's may not be watering enough. Here in Davis and in my particular vineyard, I see it obviously that I do have a pretty high clay content. And the high clay content can tend to bind the potassium if there isn't enough water to pull some of that away and get it into the pore water. And potassium is available to the vine in the pore water as the positively charged potassium ion. So to deal with an apparent potassium deficiency, the first thing you want to do is just do what you can to improve the soil tilth, but also the main thing is just don't let the soil get too dry. And that may be the solution to any potassium issue you might see. Zinc, that's one thing that perhaps the best detection for that is to look at shoot tips. In the picture here you show just stunted and distorted shoot tips. And so poor fruit set is sort of an end result. And then again, in clay soils, you might be a little more likely to see this than in other areas. And for correcting a zinc deficiency, foliar application is apparently the most effective way to deal with that. The plant takes it up that way most effectively. Okay, and here are a few things I took these pretty much directly out of literature, and I know with nitrogen potassium I do put small amounts of dry fertilizer just under the drippers, and the timing of it is there. One thing about you want to do with grapes is after you harvest, you do need to give them a good shot of water, and after harvest, you probably still have time while the vine still has leaves to give a little dose of nitrogen to replace what the vine has used and what left the vineyard in the grapes you harvested. And maybe a spring application after below. Potassium may or may not be truly necessary. If you find out that it's you do need it, the timing isn't quite so critical since it's not going to run away from you during the winter. And then the timing of zinc is right there, as you see, prior to bloom and after bloom. Okay, pest management. Joan, if you're still there, if your little bugs are making your leaves look like that, sort of mottled and all, yeah, that's what the leaf hoppers like to do. And I actually lost a major part of my crop a few years back because I had a horrid infection. Leaves actually were almost brown before the crop was ready. And so I did some fairly serious work on them the following year. Then powdery mildew. These two are the most common likely pests you're going to see around here. Powdery mildew, you've probably seen it on other plants as well, just sort of a gray looking stuff on the leaves and on the grapes. And on the grapes, it sort of skin, might even split them, and yeah, those will ruin the crop too. One thing is that in high heat, last summer, I didn't really have to do much to protect against powdery mildew because it was too blasted hot for so many days. And it just never, I think the heat may have taken care of it all by itself. But one of the best things you can do is good canopy management. Canopy management is something I'll talk at in a little more detail later on. but it helps reduce likelihood of both powdery mildew and leaf hoppers. The point is you're trying to have an open, airy canopy and let a little sunlight in. Since this is Yolo County, it's very hot. The sun can be pretty brutal. You don't necessarily need a lot, just a little mottled light coming in through the leaf canopy. And particularly around the grape clusters, get a lot of air circulation. Both those pests do not do well in a nice aerated and well-lit canopy. If there's any indication that the summer isn't going to be quite so hot as it was last summer, sulfur dust or wettable sulfur it is sort of the go-to method for controlling mildew. And you want to get your first dose, sort of a prophylactic dose. You know, as I said, they're when the shoots are at about 6 inches or so, and before bloom happens, get that on there. And here in Yolo County, with good canopy management, that might be all the sulfur you need. In other areas, I hear people applying sulfur, you know, once every 3 weeks or so throughout the summer, and I think some of those people might be kind of overdoing it. To control leaf hoppers, this is one I really recommend looking at the pest notes. And when you go into the IPM website, you want to look at agricultural pests, because the one for the backyard doesn't really look at leaf hoppers as ever being much of a problem. But if you have like an large arbor full of grapes or a vineyard, there's just more habitat. And so you go to the agricultural pest to get a good rundown on how to deal with leaf hoppers, including procedures for monitoring them. You look at the underside of the leaf and you start seeing the nymphs, and they have a process for checking that periodically. And if you start seeing them up to a certain number count, that's when you need to start worrying about maybe applying. And what I'm putting here is insecticidal oil. They have a whole listing rating effectiveness from top to bottom. At the top you have imidacloprid, and you can't really find that in your standard hardware store or nursery. I think it's more of a commercial product. When I had my serious problem on my 1 acre, I actually was able to acquire some, but took a very small dose. I applied that, and I haven't had to go back to it since. So, but anyway, the insecticidal oil, and again, you want to get to it early because they have several stages of nymphs that they go through, and you just try to catch them early. They do overwinter in everything that gets left behind in the vineyard. So another thing you can do is when you're thinning leaves early on, when your shoots are maybe just 6 inches to a foot, just take off the bottom 2 or 3 leaves just right there. Do it real soon. That gives the leaf hoppers, you know, less access to leaves. They have to go farther to get to the leaves. You type a dieback. This gets back to why I'm talking to you now about pruning and not doing it quite yet, waiting till say the end of February to actually do your pruning. This is a fungal disease that makes your vines look like this vine on the right. Those leaves out at the right end are infected. Over toward the left-hand side of the picture, you see healthy leaves. The only way to fix that problem is to cut it all off. And when you make a cut and you see that little pie-shaped dark area, that shows your eutypa. And if you've cut through that, it's time to re-sanitize your clippers and make another cut further on down until you don't see that anymore. And you don't really recover from that other than maybe there's another shoot you can pull over and flop over to replace what you just cut off. But you'd rather just not get there. And the way you type gets into the vine is it gets in through open pruning wounds in damp weather. So by delaying pruning until the end of February, maybe even early March, there's less likelihood that you're going to get a lot of damp weather that'll facilitate an infection. Okay, vertebrate pests. A quick one here. Deer like to eat your vines. 10-foot high fence to keep them out is how you control them. With birds and then small rodents, anything that can get into climb up the vine or get into itself, you basically need to net it. And on the very right-hand side, you can see netting over those vines. And I don't put on the netting until the vines are pretty well into veraison. I'm starting to taste a bit of sugar because it's a hassle to try to deal with vine issues when the netting's draped all over them. And you do have to seal it up pretty well because they crawl in through open spots. Then finally, on the left-hand side, you see young vines with those tubes. Those tubes support the new vine, but they also keep the rabbits from eating them. So. Okay, pruning. I put sentences down there that really covered all. You see two pictures of honesty. You just got a very crowded canopy and just all sorts of diseases get in there, and the vines will overcrop and the crop may not ever ripen because it's carrying too much. And there's just all sorts of trouble associated with that kind of excessive vigor. So you definitely need to prune. The winter pruning is when you're removing most of what grew on the vine last year. You're just basically leaving behind a limited number of buds. And out in the wine industry, in those vineyards, they actually probably have a procedure in place where they actually have a numerical bud count for each vine that they want. And they tell the pruners, 35 buds per vine. Go to it. And then later in the season is when you're doing canopy management. That's when you're removing various materials just to balance the crop and air out that canopy and keep the vine healthy. So spur pruning, you see in the lower right, vines have been pruned, and then just go to the left, you see what they looked like before pruning. And as you can see where I pruned it, I've just left two buds behind in each location. A little closer, I have two pictures there. One in the upper left is before, and the one in the lower right is after at the same location. And that larger stump in the middle that those two shoots are grown out of, that was last year's spur that was left behind. And you see the two canes that came out from each of the two buds. So what you want to do is restore it back to what it was last year. So you're going to cut one of those canes off, leaving behind two buds again. And what you hopefully are able to do most of the time is to cut off the cane that is growing out of the higher position. Because as you're leaving behind that wood, you may, after several years, you may end up with the effect you see in that upper right picture, where that spur location extends each year to the point where it's sort of outgrowing the trellis system. Then one of the main criteria as to deciding whether you can spur prune or cane prune is that vines that can be spur pruned, all of those buds will be able to produce fruitful canes the following year. Some kinds of grapes, Thompson seedless is an example, is where those first two buds are not likely to be fruitful. You need to leave a cane with more buds on it in order to get new canes with fruit. So cane pruning is the way you deal with that. It's where you're just selecting a certain number of canes. In this vineyard, they've just left 2 canes per vine. You know, you could do 4 if you want, if you have the trellis system to handle it. Then besides canes, also right in the middle, there's some renewal spurs, and I can show more detail on that later. Like right here. So what you're doing is you're putting out a new fresh cane each year, and then after that year is over, you're lopping the whole thing off and just leaving behind a 2 bud spur. Oh yeah, use my pointer. So here's the result of the season, and that cane has shot out several new canes and produced fruit. And you end up just lopping all that off. But what you do is you take a cane and you lay it down and tie it to the wire for next year. If you have if you're growing a big vine on a lattice, or you have some big straight shade structure going on, it's kind of the same thing, only you're just providing more canes and you're spreading the new canes out in whatever direction you want it to grow. So yeah, you have to understand how the vine grows, and then just sort of work from there as to where you want to direct your next year's crop. And so each year, since you're cutting off last year's cane, you have to leave behind a renewal spur, which gives you new canes for the following year. And then the new cane that comes out of the spur here is what you're going to be flopping down for next year, and rinse and repeat. I put this in. This is a vine that requires cane pruning, but shows how cane pruning can be a little hard to deal with if you don't fully understand. It's very confusing in the starting position. But zooming in, what you see is this old cane that goes from the bottom right to the upper left that has the rough surface. That's the old cane that you flopped down to the wire last year. And all the rest of these smooth canes are the new canes that just came out in the recent year. So the first thing you do when you approach that vine, you identify these old canes and you see where the new ones are, and you go ahead and you just lop that one off right there. And that unclutters the picture greatly, so you can figure out which of these other canes you keep and want to use as this year's cane, and then maybe 1 or 2 of these you lop off to just leave renewal spurs. This next slide is what I ended up with in dealing with that vine. 4 new canes, and then I selected locations for the renewal spurs to pretty much recenter the vine. If you let things go out too far, you lose a lot of wire length there, and you have less room for your cane. So yeah, just bring in your renewal spurs back in the middle. Okay, canopy management. This is, people don't necessarily discuss this as much as they should. If you do a really good job of that, you really do minimize the amount of spraying you have to do or other forms of pest management. And it's also going to produce better fruit probably. So it's all sorts of things you do to remove various parts of the vine to improve the vine health. So maybe cutting out shoots, maybe cutting out grape clusters. You will definitely be doing a lot of leaf thinning. And if you have very vigorous vines, you may need to do a little bit of hedging as well, cutting off those shoot tips. And also those secondary leaves that I showed you on that picture earlier. If you have an over vigorous vine, it'll tend to produce a lot of those, and they really muck up your canopy a bit, and you end up pulling out a lot of those as well. This is a nice looking vine. You see here around the clusters, you see bare shoots where leaves have been pulled off. Air can blow on through there, and you see a little light through it, and the grapes are healthy. So, and if you do a good bit of this early, any spraying you might need to do is a lot more effective. You just get better coverage. It's easier to get good coverage. Here's what you don't want to see. And actually, that's one of our vines out at WC, or a vine route WCC, and what they have looked like before. And you see, yeah, just a lot of leaves and a lot of darkness in there, and vines growing all the way down to the ground. And one thing about leaves that aren't getting any sunlight is they're not doing the vine any good. They're having to be, the vine's feeding them, but they're not conducting the photosynthesis. Photosynthesis needs to be done to provide the food. So they're almost in sort of a parasite role there. So I would do is I go in with the clippers and just sort of, can people still hear me? I'd be clipping off leaves that are draping on the ground, and go underneath and clip out everything that's in total darkness. Just, it's not needed. So in winter pruning, that's where a lot of your canopy management happens as well, in that you can over prune or you can under prune. If in either way, you can end up with excessive canopy, and you're going to have to do more work later in the season. If you don't prune it enough, you're obviously going to send out more shoots, and that, of course, will increase all the leaves and everything, as well as a lot of clusters that may be too many. But over pruning, what happens there is there's a certain amount of growth potential the vine has, and it will, if you don't leave behind enough shoots, the vine may actually overcompensate and send out shoots that go out 10, 15 feet, which just sort of go over into your next vine, or if it's in your backyard, start climbing up a tree nearby, or whatever. And it does that. And then also you see a lot of those secondary shoots which also clog up your canopy and darken it up and prevent the breeze from blowing through. So again, you have the crowded canopy, and you may see your pests, and also you're cheating yourself out of some grapes you could have otherwise had. And that's pretty much the end of it. Here's another picture of a nice, healthy looking vine that's well managed. The leaves are a nice color, and so on. And I do believe that that's end of it. Any questions you would like to?
No one wrote questions into the chat, but we can take questions now if anyone has one. Questions?
Actually, one thing I might add is I had planned to actually do a grape pruning workshop at the Woodland Community College. And I thought I had it scheduled for Saturday, the 28th of this month. I heard that maybe it hasn't been scheduled for that date, but a date earlier, actually this coming Saturday. I really need to clarify that as soon as well, that's the day after tomorrow. But yeah, I need to clarify that. In which, I'll actually be out there pruning the vines, and if people want to, actually, I hope they would come with a pair of clippers and help out. I think there are about 6-7 vines out there that need to be pruned.
Here's a question. I have
Yes.
I have a Thompson seedless that always produces very small grapes. Delicious, but very small. Any way to increase grape size?
Good question. Thompson seedless doesn't naturally produce grapes the size you see in the grocery store. I think if they're good and healthy, they're going to naturally put out grapes about the size of the end of your little finger. However, the way they get big commercial vineyards is they either girdle the vines. I don't think they do that so much anymore. And I wouldn't want to do that myself because it's a pretty drastic process. I'd worry about killing my vine. The other way is there's a growth hormone they use, which is probably the most likely thing that's made the grapes be that large. However, if your grapes are really small, chances are you may be just leaving too much fruit on the vine. Just thin the crop a bit. And also, I've heard that if you, when the clusters are still small, cut off the bottom third of the cluster, the grapes will get a little bit bigger. But otherwise, if the grapes are about the size of the tip of your little finger, that's you're doing well, and that's good.
A note came in saying the grape pruning workshop is January 28th.
Great.
Is that still happening?
That's my plan.
Okay. And where?
I need to check up and make sure no one's saying it's earlier. Yeah.
Okay.
It's at Woodland Community College, and it's in the area where the college has their own ag set up, and there's 2 or 3 greenhouses there, and it's in a fenced area in the northwest corner of campus.
Okay.
And we'll put out signs.
Another comment came in for January 28th as the date from Marianne Cantor for the hands-on class.
All
And
right.
then here's one more question for you. Is it possible to kill a grapevine by over pruning? One of my plants did nothing last spring.
To kill a vine, as long as you're leaving healthy buds behind, there's something something should be coming out in the spring, to send out leaves and keep the vine alive. If you have a vine that's completely dead and isn't sending out new shoots in the spring, I don't know, maybe you just cut off all of the previous year's shoots and didn't leave behind any viable buds. Or something else killed it. Someone sprayed Roundup. Yeah, I don't know.
That's it.
Okay. Actually, one more thing here is if in the Yolo County in the ANR website, if you go into resource documents and dig down a bit, there is a document that was put out by the Cooperative Extension Sacramento County office, and Chuck Engels was the lead author of that, and he was an ag advisor as well. But this document is EHN 97, and it's a pretty good document. It has a lot better pictures of the pruning scenario, and actually showed a good idea for how to train vines on an arbor or something like that. So there's some good information there. There are a few things that are said there that differ a little bit from what I said, but not drastically. So
And you had one more
that's,
question.
that's some reading material, I know. One more question?
Yes. My grapevines are right against the fence and can be accessed only from one side and get lots of bugs despite of spraying with neem oil or insecticide soap. What else can be done?
Okay. If there's sort of depends on what your trellising system looks like. If there's a way it can be kind of pulled away from the wall a bit, any extra distance would help. That air circulation issue is kind of a big deal. And yeah, I'm trying to think. And the leaf thinning. And if you get to leaf thinning early before these things take hold, all the better. You're less likely to need the sprays later on. But again, for powdery mildew, getting that prophylactic dose early on when the shoots are just out, 6 inches or so, that could at least help with the powdery mildew. And also at that stage, maybe if you took off the bottom 2 leaves on those new shoots, that might slow down progression of leaf hoppers.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody, for attending. So don't forget, the 26th will be composting, and Jennifer Gilbert does a great job. So
Yeah.
it's a good thing certainly a good thing to know about. All right. All right, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Safe
See you in
drive.
2 weeks.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Doug.
Weeks.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thanks,
Thank
Doug.
you.
Bye.
Bye.